I don't know why her voice stayed in my head the rest of that night. Maybe it was the way she didn't smile when she said it. You remind me of someone. Not a question. Not even curiosity. More like she just caught a glimpse of an old photograph she'd never meant to see again. It was supposed to be a simple favor. My friend had asked if I could help his aunt, his mom's sister, carry in a few boxes from her car. She just moved into the place 2 streets over. The kind of quiet neighborhood where every driveway smells faintly of someone's barbecue, and you can hear the clink of ice in a glass from the next yard over. She opened the door before I could knock, like she'd been standing just inside, listening for footsteps. Her hair was tied back loosely, a few strands falling near her jaw, and she had this stillness to her. Not the stiff kind, more like the world slowed a little around her, and she was perfectly fine with that. I told her where I should put the boxes. She just nodded and led me through a narrow hallway into a kitchen that smelled faintly of coffee, even though the cup by the sink had gone cold. When I set the last one down, she said it, soft, distracted, but direct. You remind me of someone. I leaned on the counter, trying to play it off. Hope he was lucky. Her eyes flicked up, green, but muted, like the first leaves in early spring. She didn't answer. Just looked at me a second too long, then went back to unwrapping a glass vase from newspaper. The thing about moments like that is, they don't feel big until later. At the time, it's just a glance, a half smile, a few extra seconds before either of you moves. But my hands stayed in my pockets because I wasn't sure if I could stand that close without reaching out. We kept talking, but not about anything that mattered. How long she'd lived in the city, how the movers had scratched her table, how she couldn't get used to the sound of the neighbors' wind chimes at night. I kept waiting for her to ask something about me, but she didn't. She just listened. Like she already knew more than I'd told her. At one point, she brushed past me to reach for a glass on the shelf. The air between us shifted. Maybe I imagined it, but it felt like she lingered, her shoulder almost against mine, her sleeve catching for half a second. By the time I made it back to the front door, the air outside had that just before rain heaviness. I told her to call if she needed anything else. She tilted her head a little, as if deciding whether to say something. Careful with offers like that, she said. I laughed, too quick, like I wasn't sure how else to respond. Why? Her hand rested on the doorframe, nails tapping once against the wood. She didn't look away when she answered. Because I might take you up on it. There are things people say that you forget in minutes. Then there are things that feel like they split your life into 2 parts. The seconds before you heard them, and everything after. That was the second one. And standing there, with the smell of rain pressing in and her eyes holding mine, I realized something. She wasn't talking about the boxes anymore. The rain started while I was still walking home. It wasn't much, just enough to make the streetlights blur, but I kept thinking about her voice when she said it. Careful with offers like that. I didn't see her again for 2 days. Not until she called, saying her washing machine wouldn't start. The number flashing on my phone felt like a mistake at first, like she'd meant to dial someone else. When I got there, she was barefoot, standing in the laundry room, arms crossed loosely over her chest. She nodded toward the machine without much explanation. I crouched down, fiddling with the dial, pretending I knew more about it than I did. It wasn't the washing machine I was aware of. It was the way the air smelled faintly like her shampoo. The way she leaned against the wall, silent except for the soft sound of her nails tapping against her arm. Sorry, she said finally. I wouldn't have called, but I don't really know many people here yet. That's fine, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She didn't answer right away. When I glanced up, her eyes were already on me, not just looking, but searching, like she was measuring something she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Is he still around? The question left my mouth before I had time to stop it. A pause. Then she shook her head once. No. Not for a while now. She turned away like the subject wasn't worth more words, but her shoulders tensed just slightly before she did. I went back to pretending to fix the machine, but my thoughts wouldn't stay still. Whoever he was, he had been important enough to leave an echo. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I didn't like the idea of her feeling that space empty. When the machine finally hummed to life, she smiled, not wide, but enough to make me forget what I was doing. You're good, she said softly. I shrugged. Just lucky, I guess. She tilted her head at that, a shadow of something unreadable passing through her expression. Then she stepped closer, close enough that the warmth from her bare arm reached me before she touched me. Her fingers rested lightly against my forearm. Not long. Not lingering. Just enough for my breath to catch. Stay for a coffee, she said. There was no reason to say no. And yet I hesitated, because the thought of sitting in her kitchen, hearing the rain still falling outside, and pretending this was nothing, it felt like standing too close to a fire. But when I looked at her, she was already halfway to the kitchen, not waiting for my answer. I followed. And somewhere between the doorway and the counter, I realized I wasn't worried about the coffee. I was worried about what I might say if we kept sitting in the same room. She poured the coffee without asking how I liked it. No cream, no sugar, just black and steaming, the way I never drank it. I didn't say anything. We sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. The rain against the window was steady now, a kind of background hum that made everything else feel closer. She wrapped her hands around her mug, not drinking, just holding it like she needed the warmth. You know, she said quietly, you really do remind me of him. There it was again. This him. I wanted to ask, but her eyes were somewhere else, far away enough that I felt like an intruder just being in the room. Instead, I said, You never told me what happened to him. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, but it didn't reach her eyes. Some things just end. She finally took a sip, wincing a little at the heat. When she set the cup down, her fingers brushed mine, barely, but enough to make me still. I should have moved my hand, but I didn't. Neither did she. Before I could think of what to say, a sharp knock came at the door. She froze, then stood, her chair scraping lightly against the floor. I heard muffled voices, her and someone else, male, older. I couldn't make out the words, just the tone, polite, but guarded. When she came back, she didn't explain. She just sat down again, closer this time, her knee brushing mine under the table. You should probably go soon, she said softly, but the way she looked at me told a different story. I tried to play it safe. If you need space, I didn't say that. Her voice was almost a whisper now. The pause between us stretched. My pulse was too loud in my ears. I glanced toward the window, anywhere but at her. But then she reached across, her hand curling lightly around my wrist. It wasn't the kind of touch you could mistake for casual. You ever wish you'd said something sooner? She asked. I swallowed hard. All the time. Her thumb moved, just barely, against my skin. For a second, it felt like the only thing in the room was that touch, like everything else had fallen away. My mind screamed to pull back, to keep this moment from going anywhere it shouldn't. But my body stayed exactly where it was. And when she leaned in, just slightly, just enough that her breath was warm against my jaw, I realized it wasn't a question of if we'd crossed the line. It was when. The clock on her wall ticked too loudly. She hadn't let go of my wrist yet. My coffee sat untouched, cooling between us, but I couldn't have lifted the cup if I tried. You don't even know what you're doing, she said finally, but her tone was soft, like she was asking herself the same thing. I wanted to say she was wrong, that I knew exactly what I was doing. But the truth was, I didn't. I just knew I didn't want to leave. Her eyes flicked toward the window, then back to me. You're too young. And you're too what? My voice came out rougher than I meant. She gave a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. Too smart to let this happen. We didn't move for a moment. Just the rain, and the faint hum of the washing machine in the next room. I thought about all the times I'd seen her since that first day, all the tiny moments I'd held on to, her leaning against the doorframe, her bare feet on the kitchen floor, the way she always looked like she was carrying more than she'd say. Then tell me to go, I said. She stared at me for a long moment. You wouldn't listen. I swallowed hard. She was right. Her hand slid away from my wrist but stayed on the table, inches from mine. He used to look at me like that, she said quietly. Like I was more than I am. I didn't know who he was to her, but I knew I didn't like the ghost of him sitting between us. Maybe you are. That made her meet my eyes. Really meet them. Something passed across her face, something I couldn't name but felt like a door cracking open. Don't, she whispered. Why not? Her lips parted, but no answer came. Instead, she leaned back slightly, as if putting just enough distance between us to think straight. But her hand stayed where it was. The silence stretched until it became something else, thick, heavy, full of all the things we weren't saying. I wanted to break it, to tell her exactly what I'd been thinking since the first time I saw her. Instead, I said, if you really wanted me to stop, you'd tell me. Her gaze didn't waver. And if I don't? I don't know how long we sat like that, her question hanging between us like a thread pulled too tight. My pulse was in my throat, my chest, everywhere. I should have answered. I should have moved. But I didn't. And in the space between that stillness and the next breath, I knew, whatever happened next, there was no going back. Her question was still in the air when a faint buzzing broke it apart. She glanced at the counter, her phone, screen lit. She didn't move to answer. The buzzing stopped, then started again, sharper this time. Finally, she reached for it, but not before I saw the name. My friend's mom. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen, then hit decline. The phone landed face down on the counter with a soft thud. You weren't supposed to know I was here, I said quietly. Her eyes flicked to mine. It's not like that. Then what is it? She exhaled, leaning back in her chair. For a moment, I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, I met you before, she said. You don't remember. The words landed like a drop of cold water. What are you talking about? It was years ago. You were at your friend's house, his mother's birthday, I think. I'd just come back into town. You carried a cake in from the car for me. I searched my memory and, like a photo developing slowly, I could see it, me, 17, awkward, holding a cake box while she thanked me with a smile that seemed like it belonged to someone else's world. You remembered that? I asked. Her gaze softened. Some people, you remember for no reason you can explain. The room felt smaller then, the rain louder, like everything outside was pushing us closer together. But before I could answer, she looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers. It's why I noticed you that first day. Why I said you reminded me of someone. I didn't want you to know because. She met my eyes again. Because once you notice someone, it's hard to unnotice them. Something in my chest tightened at that. It wasn't the kind of confession you could pretend away. The phone buzzed again, and this time she silenced it without looking. You have to go, she said, but her voice was soft, almost reluctant. Do you want me to? Her lips pressed together, like the answer might break something in the air between us. Instead of replying, she stood and walked to the door. I followed, each step feeling heavier than the last. She opened it halfway but didn't move aside. The rain had slowed outside, the street empty. I waited for her to say goodbye, but she didn't. She just looked at me for a long, unbroken moment, then said, If I call you, you'll come? I nodded. Then maybe I shouldn't. The door closed, but not all the way, just enough for me to see her hand still on the frame, holding it there, like she wasn't ready for it to end. And in that half-open space, I knew this wasn't over. It was 3 days before I heard from her again. No words in the text, just an address. Not hers. A coffee shop on the edge of downtown. I almost didn't go. Almost. She was already there when I walked in, sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a paper cup, staring at the window like she was trying to watch the rain even though it wasn't raining. When she saw me, she didn't smile, but her shoulders eased just slightly. I sat across from her, the smell of burnt espresso between us. I shouldn't have called you, she said. Then why did you? Her eyes stayed on the table. Because I didn't want to wonder what you'd say if I didn't. Silence. The kind where every second feels like a decision you're not ready to make. I'm not good at this, she said finally. I've already done the thing where you get too close to someone you shouldn't. It doesn't end well. You think I'm a mistake? Her head lifted at that. No. I think you're dangerous. I leaned forward. And you called me anyway. A faint, almost helpless laugh escaped her. Yeah. I guess I did. She looked at me then, really looked, and something in her expression was bare, stripped of all the careful distance she'd been keeping. I've been trying not to want this, she said quietly. But I'm tired of pretending it's not there. My hand found hers before I could stop it. Warm, steady, real. She didn't pull away. You're not the only one, I said. Her thumb brushed over my knuckles, slow and deliberate. If we do this, it can't be halfway. I wasn't planning on halfway. Her gaze dropped to our hands, then back to my face. Then you need to know something. I'm not who I was the last time someone looked at me like you do. I've made mistakes. I've left people behind. Then maybe we start where we are, I said. Not where we were. For a long moment neither of us moved. Then she exhaled, her fingers tightening just slightly around mine. Okay, she said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was enough. When we left, she walked beside me, close enough that our arms brushed now and then. Outside, the air smelled faintly of rain again, though the sky was clear. At the curb, she stopped. One more thing, she said. I waited. If this goes wrong, she murmured, I don't want to regret it. I didn't give her a promise. I just leaned in, close enough that her breath caught, and said, Then let's not give it the chance. And when her lips finally met mine, it wasn't the start or the end, just the place where everything else began. It's been 6 months since that day at the coffee shop. I don't think either of us knew what would come after. Not really. We didn't talk about the future then, we just stepped into it, one careful moment at a time. The first weeks were strange. Everything felt too new, too fragile, like saying the wrong thing might send us back to pretending. But then came the small, ordinary pieces, grocery lists written in her handwriting, mornings where she'd slide a mug of coffee across the table before I even sat down, evenings where the silence between us felt safe instead of tense. It's not that we never fought. We did. Sometimes about stupid things, what to cook for dinner, whether she worked too late, but sometimes about bigger things. She'd pull back, afraid she was asking too much. I'd push forward, afraid I wasn't giving enough. But we kept choosing each other. That was the difference. She told me more about her past, about him, the one she thought I reminded her of. She said it wasn't the likeness in my face that unsettled her, but the way I looked at her, like she wasn't a puzzle to solve, just someone I wanted to be near. And I told her about that day years ago, with the birthday cake I barely remembered carrying, and how I'd thought of her from time to time since, without realizing she'd thought of me too. Some nights, when the light's low and we're both too tired to talk, I still catch her watching me the way she did in that kitchen months ago. Only now, there's no question about whether she'll tell me to go. She says I've made her feel younger. I tell her she's made me feel older, in the good way, the steady way. We don't fit the neat picture people expect. She's reminded of it every time a friend tilts their head and says, "Are you too?" I'm reminded of it when I catch the double takes in public. But those moments pass. What stays is the quiet understanding that whatever we've built, we built it knowing the risks. Sometimes I think back to the rain that night, to her voice telling me I reminded her of someone, and to the way my heart kicked in my chest when she said she might take me up on my offer. She did. And I'm glad she did. So if there's a moral here, it's this: sometimes the thing you're afraid to touch is exactly the thing you should hold on to. And sometimes the line you think you can't cross is just the edge of where your real life begins. Because the truth is, nothing about her was safe. And that's what made it worth it. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?